Do I have an original podcast idea in my head? My bald head? Maybe if I were thinner, I'd be happier and less anxious. It's not productive to think that way, though. I'm going to go to the gym. I have an exercise bike. I have a good job. Some people seem to like the podcast and the writing. I'm not sure. Is this what I should be doing? Maybe I should write a screenplay. I don't know. All I do is sit in front of a computer typing and editing. I'm not sure if people will enjoy it. But I still have to try. I want people to experience some joy in this miserable, fucked up world where mostly terrible things happen, but we have to distract ourselves from the terrible things. I should be meal prepping. I should get a book on meal prepping. I work in a library. Really, it's about time management, confidence, planning, preparing. Who cares if I'm overweight and bald? Well, I do. Probably that's why I wear hoodies and hats. Maybe it's my brain chemistry. I don't know. That's probably what's wrong. Maybe my whole family, going all the way back to my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, had similar issues. And all my anxiety can be reduced to a chemical imbalance. I make a weird kind of whimpering sound when I'm anxious. Anyway, this is a podcast, not a therapy session. I bet people will find this to be really annoying, so I better stop it now. It's a podcast conversation they want to hear, especially Sharon. Well, hopefully this isn't silly. Well, too late. Yep, it already is. Nothing's going to change that. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Directors Club podcast, the theater of the new ear. I'll explain that more later. I'm your host, Jim Laskowski, and I have the creator, founder, and host of one of my favorite film festivals here, the Mental Filmness Film Festival. And she also happens to be my favorite person on the planet. Welcome back, Sharon Gissy.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning the film festival, and I'm really excited to be back here again.
Do you know who we're going to talk about today, Sharon?
Hopefully, yes, because I have been rewatching his movies, yeah.
Oh, and Lucy, my cat, has decided she doesn't want to be a part of the podcast. She's on the love seat between the two of us. I think she's getting up because she's like, oh, I don't know if I'm the biggest Charlie Kaufman fan. He's kind of, his sense of humor just does not work for me. I'm out of here.
She decided to leave.
It's okay. It's also because our voices are projecting more, and she's probably like, oh no, I can't handle that right now. Oh my gosh, ladies and gentlemen, I am so unbelievably thrilled because we're going to talk about my favorite writer of all time, Charlie Kaufman. And most people know, I think, I probably have said that on the podcast before, but he's my favorite writer, and Paul Thomas Anderson's my favorite director, and I don't think that'll ever change, although I've said that before. But we're doing something a little wacky here on the show, since we're going to cover 3 movies that he's written, not directed. Oh boy. I know this isn't Writers Club, but we are also going to focus on the 3 movies that he's directed. So don't think we're completely cheating here. Yes. So Sharon, also, remind people, I think you were on the Todd Haynes episode and you talked about your film festival, but it's been a year. What was 2023 like for the Mental Filmness Film Festival? How did it go? And just sort of give people a little synopsis, summation of how things went and what people can look forward to this year.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for, again, mentioning that and kind of plugging in a little. But this year was, I'd have to say it was the best year in terms of the live screen. It's interesting because it started in 2019, so there's one live year followed by a couple virtual years, so it's been kind of hard to build, I think, an audience and an identity for it. It's a Chicago-based film festival about mental health, and I feel like this year we really tapped into the Chicago community specifically more. We had a couple of really good partnerships, one with Step Up for Mental Health. It's a Chicago nonprofit organization. They were great. With the UIC Counseling and Wellness Center. We continue to partner with the Diverse Ability Committee of the Chicago Public Library. Between all of those things, we had pretty decent audience for a small Film Festival. It was a pretty decent audience, and they were a really engaged audience. So that was great to see. The virtual festival continued. People continue from all over the world even to enjoy watching that. So that was really cool. But I think this year the big difference was the kind of uptick in interest in the live screenings. I really tried to promote those more and have more of them in Chicago. So that was really cool to see.
It was really cool to see what you accomplished at the Facets multimedia screening, which was just remarkable to see all those young filmmakers on a Zoom call and sharing their process with the audience. I was so moved by that, and it just went to show like how much interest it's grown. This festival has grown, and also you're really highlighting why short films in particular are so important too in the world of telling a story.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's something I forgot to mention on my little summary or recap, and that was actually one of my favorite parts of this year was our screening. We had a youth and mental health shorts block. So we had some student filmmakers, and I feel like we always kind of been champions of, very kind of low budget, fringe kind of filmmakers, including we show a lot of student shorts. So I kind of reached out also to Chicago film schools and had a couple from the University of Chicago submitted, and one of the filmmakers could be there. And that was very cool, seeing these projects from young, sometimes, teenager, 16 years old, young filmmakers. And they just had like so much cool energy and creativity to them, and to hear them speak about them. And Facets, I have to say, was an incredible venue in terms of supporting us and getting everything set up just the way we wanted. And they were quite wonderful. So I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I wouldn't have wanted to forget crediting them. So thank you.
And you also showed a film that it's probably in my top 30. It didn't make my final top 25, which will be covered on the next episode of Directors Club very shortly, probably in 1 week from when this is coming out. You're going to get the big, probably 9-hour long episode of me, Patrick, and Bill talking about our favorite films of 2023. And one of them that just missed my list is called The Year Between by Alex Heller, which you showed at Facets, and that was great to see again on the big screen. Yeah,
I mean, this year was really cool. And then I feel like a few things really kind of gelled for the festival. And one was that, like I said, it's kind of trying to bring in more Chicago interest and get more people into live screenings. And this kind of happened to come across, Jim, you really helped me connect me with The Year Between. And I did an interview with Alex Heller, and then asked, Full Spectrum Features if I could show it. But then I also just kind of discovered, while looking around through other Chicago mental health resources, Margaret Byrne and her film Any Given Day. And that's it's a documentary also based out of Chicago with, the participants in the film who were in the Cook County Mental Health Court are in Chicago, and we got to have a couple of them come and talk to us in a panel as well. So I just feel like it was there was a lot of local, connection and interest this year. So that was really cool. I'm kind of trying to bring it back to that, because there are a few film festivals based around mental health that I really want this to be the one, with the Chicago identity.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you're doing great. And I can't wait to see, where can people find out more information if they're curious, or if they even want to submit a film of their own?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. As long as you remember the spelling, it's pretty much under Mental Filmness everywhere. It's mentalfilmness.com, and that's FAILMNESS. But that's also on Facebook, facebook.com/mentalfilmness, twitter.com/mentalfilmness, filmfreeway.com/mentalfilmness. So no tricks there. It's just, if you could just remember the name Mental Filmness, it's everywhere on the internet.
And I love seeing what people submit. I love seeing the final lineup. And of course, I'll be there to support it, because I find it to be a very, very important cause. Just in terms of getting people more invested and interested and breaking the stigma, as they say, surrounding mental illness. And it's something that I know I struggle with, you struggle with. Who knows? Lucy might struggle with it. And any number of people out there that, I think we all know somebody, I think, at the very least, if not ourselves. So, and all these stories are really, original and vulnerable. That's one word that will come up quite a bit when we talk about our subject today, because I can't think of anybody who's more vulnerable to the point of putting himself in his own art in a way that's very direct. And I think that's a nice jumping off point, because to talk about Charlie Kaufman, we're going to be talking about him as a person in a way, because he brings himself to each project, even if it's a book adaptation or a play or animation. It's clear that every time that he creates something, he's putting the complete and honest truth of the human experience.
The whole point of writing something is to have people experience it. And if I sit here and say, well, this means this and this means this, not only is it pointless because it either means that to people or it doesn't, it also gets in the way of people having their individual experience of the movie. So I try to put enough of in there so that people can interact with it on an individual basis. So my sort of pontificating on it would be meaningless. There's no template for a screenplay, or there shouldn't be. There are at least as many screenplay possibilities as there are people who write them. We've been conned into thinking there is a pre-established form. Like any big business, the film business believes in mass production. It's cheaper and more efficient as a business model. I think what might make this form of endeavor exciting for writers is that they find themselves in an environment where they are encouraged to use their powers to explore the world, their minds, and the form itself. Think about the staggering possibilities, the marriage of light, vibration, and time.
I can't even begin to tell you how much his work has meant to me, and I know that you're a huge fan. I think, I especially in light of what we were all going through just a couple years ago during lockdown, and deciding I'm going to put forth however $100 to host a screening at the Music Box Theater, my favorite theater, to show my second favorite movie, Synecdoche, New York, which you attended, which Patrick attended. And to me, like, that might be, even though it wasn't a huge crowd or anything, it was a very intimate experience of a movie that I mean, a lot of people have talked about it. I can certainly say that Roger Ebert, Amy Nicholson, any number of film critics that love this movie as much as I do have said so much about it. But I think it meant a lot to me that you were there for that screening, and it meant a lot to I really appreciate the Music Box for doing it, because I think we were going through so much at that time, and we kind of needed a movie that's all about life and how awful it can be and how beautiful it can be, and how, you know, we're just like, I feel like he captures the fact that human beings are a mess, but that's okay. Like, it doesn't have to be good or bad. We're just human beings, and we're trying to be whatever we are, and who knows what that can be and how much that can change, how much our identity can change, how much our perceptions of gender have changed. I mean, there's so many things going on throughout his work that feel prescient. When I watch it, I go, it feels like he's ahead of his time and yet speaking to the times. I mean, it's just so much wrapped up in all of his work, but we're definitely going to talk about Synecdoche at length, I imagine, once we get to it, because when you're watching it, you can't even keep up with all of its ideas. It's kind of overwhelming.
Well, and I have to thank you for showing that as well, because it's one of my favorite movies. It might be my favorite movie. I don't know. It's always hovering in my top 5 at least. But like, that was the first time I'd seen on the big screen. And there's all these, as you know, and we'll probably talk about like minute details and little Easter eggs throughout the film, like, all the Tom Noonan appearances and just weird things on the wall or out of the corner on the TV or whatever, that I, watching it, I'd always thought, what kind of person, notices this when they're watching it, the first time or even the second time. But seeing it on the big screen, I was like, oh, that's just, I get it now. You can see a lot of this stuff. Well, especially if it's there, but you can see the little things that matter so much in that movie. Yeah.
I value the experience of seeing on the big screen as much as I do at home because you can pause.
Yeah.
You can rewind. I mean, there's a lot of things that I would recommend. I mean, I could probably put in a ton of links in the show notes to YouTube videos, essays, things that have been said and written about this film that are kind of mind-blowing because, I mean, they're things that I never considered or thought about or things I hadn't noticed, and yet there are people out there, and unfortunately his name escapes me, but he did the Genius of Synecdoche, New York videos that I just... If you really want to go deep, like we're going to go deep, but that guy went beyond deep, like scene by scene and just moment by moment would find something interesting about that particular film. And again, like a lot of my favorite movies, the first time I saw it, I couldn't process it on a first viewing. I was more like, what is this? I don't know if I can handle whatever this was, but honestly, that feels pretty apt in that even the first time I saw Being John Malkovich, I was kind of like, I mainly just found it to be funny. Like this was a good, weird, surreal, absurdist comedy outside of it being something deep and having something to say about identity. It was more of like my brain at the time maybe hadn't thought deeply enough to go, well, this is an existentialist film. Let's talk about what it means and what it all means. And why I even started this podcast was basically because, well, I'm not going to be a therapist, but I can analyze movies. And I feel like that's where Charlie Kaufman comes from, is from a psychological and philosophical standpoint, but he's also somebody who embraces the dark absurdism of Kafka and Beckett and Pynchon and just like puts it all in a blender and just out comes something completely unique that he's invented that I kind of go, I don't know how he did it, but he does it. And he's somebody who wanted to be a filmmaker since the age of 7.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he went to film school and he also aspired to be an actor at first, but he sort of fell in, like he was living in Minneapolis for a while working odd jobs and just sort of fell into writing for television and sat in like writers' rooms for shows like Get a Life, The Dana Carvey Show, a lot of different things, a lot of sitcoms that kind of flopped. So he was kind of disgruntled for a while until a guy by the name of Spike Jonze said, this Being John Malkovich script here, there's something going on, and I think I want to help you make it. And they did together. What are your thoughts on Being John Malkovich, Sharon?
That's very cool. I actually didn't know that about his background, and I would have thought maybe writing was his first,
You would think so because he's so good at it.
Yeah, and no, it's kind of interesting what you said about, was this the only filmmaker where you've talked about some of their films just solely based on their writing?
I believe so.
Okay.
It's very possible that I've done this before, and I just don't remember.
Yeah, because it's kind of funny. I think even before you told me that, I read a review, and I forget who wrote it now, but it said something like he's one of the only screenwriters distinctive enough that you consider him an auteur just based on his writing. Because you could, you can watch, he's one of the only writers where you can watch something and say, I think that was written by Charlie Kaufman. And
we're using the term Kaufman-esque to describe certain things now.
Right, yeah. But anyway, I didn't really answer your question for Being John Malkovich. Yeah, no, I think this is probably his film that has the most audience appeal. I think it's a lot of fun. It's funny. I think his characters are not really, I do think there's not really as much to really like break down here as some of his later works, in terms of philosophically, or the characters are a little. I feel like they're all a little mean.
I've heard that a lot about all of his movies, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah.
No, here they just didn't seem to have as much, I don't know, depth. They had their motivations, but yeah, I think I remember seeing this in the theater. I think we talked about this when it first came out and I was in film school, and like, it was just one of those movies where everyone was talking about it, and it was one of those things where you went to see it and it really did kind of leap out at you as being something very creative and distinct and inventive and funny. That whole thing with like the 7.5 floor and the office with the low ceilings and the the Emily Dickinson puppet, the 10-foot tall or whatever, or no, it's a lot taller than that. Was it like 50 foot tall?
Yeah.
But I mean, just very funny, very surreal, and I feel like mark a really kind of distinct new filmmaking voice, even if it wasn't as deep, I guess, as some of his later movies.
Well, at the time, director Spike Jonze, even though we're not doing an episode on him, he was mainly known for being such an innovative music video director. And when I knew that he was making his first feature, I thought it was interesting that Michael Stipe was one of the producers of this film. It's like there were all ties to people that I consider to be a little eccentric, like clearly Spike Jonze, Charlie Kaufman, Michael Stipe, and to some extent, the casting of John Malkovich as John Malkovich in this movie. I always wind up talking about this in the context of why didn't this person win awards, or, awards are silly. They don't matter in the long run. Like, I mean, we put a lot of stock and weight into the Oscars and things like that. And I think it's just a way to sort of, summarize a year in film and decide, like, I think this is probably the best thing I've seen or whatever. And we do that here too. But I don't know. Why wasn't John Malkovich? Is it because he's playing himself that like people didn't necessarily garner him with the kind of awards I think he deserves? Because at one point in the movie, he even calls himself an overrated sack of shit. Like John Malkovich as John Malkovich. It's just kind of, and that's, I mean, you can just chalk it up to being self-deprecating and goofy, and like the scene with him and Charlie Sheen is hilarious. There's just a lot of things about this movie I think are hysterically funny, and just, I remember when I first saw it, I couldn't even wrap my mind around the fact that something like this was even made, because there were definitely meta things before this, and probably even before something like Scream, but just for John Malkovich to play John Malkovich and go inside his own portal at one point and have him surrounded by nothing but Malkoviches everywhere, it did feel like something I don't know if I'll ever see this again in a movie. I don't know who thought of this idea. So I think that's probably why I made a mental note of who wrote this movie. Because I said, well, this has got to be some guy I'm going to follow because he's so inventive. But you're right. I think we can't talk about the work of Charlie Kaufman without bringing up the word narcissist. Because I think that turns a lot of people off. People were really turned off by... I know you haven't seen it, but Nicolas Cage's character in Dream Scenario, and like Beau is Afraid is considered to be a really mean, nasty movie. It's just like, I think people are really turned off by that tendency to portray somebody who's very like so full of himself that he doesn't acknowledge other people or the outside world, or he's only invested in his own needs. So that's not always pleasant to experience in a movie when they don't have an arc where they suddenly get better. And certainly John Cusack's character in here really doesn't grow in any way, and he becomes more despicable throughout the film. John Cusack as Craig in this movie. And certainly watching it now, I'm just like kind of repulsed by some of the things he decides to do, including locking up his wife in a cage, among other things. So,
at gunpoint, yeah. that got pretty.
And that's the guy we're supposed to sympathize with?
Yeah. I don't really know, but I mean, you bring up a good point, I think, in that it's not only that these characters are a little narcissistic, but I think they also feel very unfulfilled.
Yes.
And, like they want to be living a different life. So that's part of it too. And that's part of their unhappiness. And I think that's what the movie kind of taps into, and wanting to become someone else through the portal, most obviously, but in other ways too, or being a puppeteer and wanting to be able to have more control over your own life.
I like that. I mean, it's true, but it's just interesting. Like, this sort of lays the groundwork of things to come, because we can talk about any number of themes that pop up throughout his entire career, whether as a writer or as a director: memory, identity, obsession, the artistic process, loneliness, losing control. I mean, just about everything he's written has some sort of portrayal of depression, or just like the consequences of what would happen if you make certain decisions that aren't necessarily the right decisions too. Because I think in this movie, there's just like the psychological implications and consequences of what would happen if you literally could become somebody else. Another body can only take you so far. You're still you in the end. Like, he's still going to be a sad, miserable, lonely person, even if he's John Malkovich, and that's exactly what ends up happening to him in the end. Like, he thinks that by being John Malkovich, he's going to, win over Maxine, and they end up completely miserable together. So I felt this way even early on. As much as I loved the movie, I just didn't like the conclusion of all the elderly people going inside the portal in like a cocoon kind of conclusion to this whole story. It's like, what happened to all those? They just live in John Malkovich together inside of his head forever? Is that what? I couldn't. And again, this is not a movie you have to like pinpoint logic. This is fantastical. It's not necessarily something I want to say this is not plausible, because most of it isn't. It's just weird to me, like how I guess they sort of choose a different vessel.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, to put some logic onto that illogic, or try to.
Logic
I
under
thought
the
that their
illogical.
next vessel was actually gonna be the baby, right? The one that Maxine and was I reading it the wrong way? But it was until their next vessel. But
so they're living in John Malkovich until they can get into the baby.
That is what I thought until it came of the right age. But
yes.
Again, I only watched that one once compared to the other ones. But what was the other thing? I loved what you said about how you're kind of trapped in yourself, even if you're able to take over this other body or something. You're still going to be have the parts of your identity that you're unhappy with, and it might give you a momentary what was it, 15 minutes or something, but like even in the end, he was not able to solve all of his problems, John Cusack or Craig, by being in the Malkovich body, because once he didn't have that, he wasn't able to escape. So I love that. That's a great observation. Yeah.
And we'd be remiss in not mentioning, especially early on here, his portrayal of gender fluidity, I guess we could say, because I don't want to speak to, because I'm not transgender, and I don't want to speak for people who are, but I'm fairly certain that some people see this as an interesting representation. I don't know if they consider it to be good or bad of, what happens with Cameron Diaz's character, who I think actually gives as much as I love John Malkovich, I think she actually gives the best performance in this movie, because she does have an interesting arc of, suddenly realizing that maybe she wants to be a man.
I decided that I'm a transsexual. I know, it's the craziest thing, Greg.
What are you fucking nuts?
No, it's just that for the first time, everything just felt right. I've got to make sure. But if the feeling is still there, I'm going to talk to Dr. Feldman about sexual reassignment surgery.
This is absurd. Besides, Feldman is an allergist, and if you're going to do something, do it right. We talked about this a million times, all right?
I'm not good at articulating this because I don't have that same experience, and I know a lot of people do. It's one of those cases where I'm like, maybe I should just insert a clip of, a transgender guest explaining their interpretation or their feelings about, because this happens in a couple of his other movies, especially Synecdoche, where we have to sort of wrestle with what he's trying to say or do with the idea of a character being both male and female to some extent, or at least having psychological traits or feeling like they're out of place in their own body in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, I'm not really sure what to make of it. Maybe if it's just another part of exploring your identity.
Yeah.
And that you want to be someone that you're not, or you don't feel like you're. And I guess in that point, you can even parallel it to being trapped in the wrong body or vessel or whatever.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I don't know if it's deeper than that per se, but it's just kind of interesting because now it seems, I'm not saying like now everybody's having that same realization, but certainly my experiences with teaching young adults for a while, that's kind of when I sort of realized that our perceptions of gender are changing, and I think younger generations are going to sort of dictate where this goes in terms of maybe a lot of people will feel like they're both male and female, or they don't necessarily belong in the body that they want to be in. And this movie sort of hints at that at a very interesting time, because 1999 was just a fascinating time for movies, and the fact that we were heading into another decade and we thought Y2K was going to destroy everything. And there's a lot of movies about suburban dystopia, and Fight Club and American Beauty, and this all seem like examples of like we're all messed up and we don't know where we are in the world and why are we the way we are and all these things. And I don't know if that's ever completely gone away, but it just seemed more prevalent. Like the types of movies being made around this time were very challenging and interesting and exciting.
No, I agree with you. I feel like it seemed like there was a lot of risky stuff coming out, at least on the big screen, and that people were asking these really deep questions. And I think it was partially because around that time, I felt like a tipping point or something.
Oh, she looked at my hairline. She thinks I'm bald. She's thinking I would never in a million years sleep with this guy.
We think you're great.
Oh, thanks. Wow, that's nice to hear. To begin, coffee would help me think. Coffee and a muffin. I'm going up to Santa Barbara this Saturday, and I was wondering.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
So I'll just be right back with your pie then.
Drum roll, please. I'm gonna be a screenwriter, like you.
I'm putting in a chase sequence. So the killer flees on horseback, cops after them on a motorcycle. And it's like a battle between motors and horses. Like technology versus horse.
Susan, we would really like to option this. You want to make it into a movie?
I want to know what it feels like to care about something passionately. John LaRoche is a tall guy, sharply handsome.
The book has no story. There's no story. Make one up. Okay, we open with LaRoche. No, we open at the beginning of time. Okay, we open with LaRoche. Crazy white man. We open on Charlie Kaufman. Fat, bald, ugly, paces. I've written myself into my screenplay. That's kind of weird, huh?
It's self-indulgent, it's narcissistic, it's solipsistic, it's pathetic. Those are his words, not mine. Anyway, it's an unadaptable book that was brilliantly adapted in a way that I still am astonished by, because the first time I saw it, my reaction was interesting. I hated the last 20 minutes of this movie. I thought it was stupid. Like, I actively went, why the hell did he choose to end it like this? It didn't make my top 10 that year. And I was like, so basically he listened to Robert McKee He basically like decided, well, I gotta throw in explosions and drugs and, you know, a chase sequence and all this shit. And he didn't listen to his own instincts. And then I thought about it more, and I looked at the co-screenwriter, Donald Kaufman, and then I suddenly got it. Donald Kaufman wrote the last 20 minutes of the movie. I got it. Finally, after like 3 viewings, I'm like, oh, this is actually a masterpiece. I love it. And I love Nicolas Cage so much. And John LaRoche, oh, what a character, to say the least. So how do you feel about Adaptation, Sharon? I'm rambling. I'm excited because this is the first like Charlie Kaufman movie where I suddenly absolutely fell in love and decided he's my favorite writer.
I think it's actually great because he did, and even though he calls the decision narcissistic and solipsistic, and I think it's really kind of honest, and I think it's a lot more relatable, and his character, even his twin brother, has more depth than anyone in Being John Malkovich, and I actually think it was a brave choice for him to kind of write about the movie about his own neurosis and writer's block and kind of self-loathing. Even though it's very uncomfortable to watch, he just makes this Nicolas Cage character. Yeah, it's like so sweaty and nervous and anxious and self-loathing. It's just at times I almost cringe. It just seems there's something very honest about it, and I feel like he. From this point, I feel like he continued to kind of write characters based on himself, more or less. So it was a good kind of beginning of that. I agree with you. It's hard to really know what to make of the fact that he kind of did everything that he said he wasn't going to do in the beginning.
Yeah, my reaction the first time was just like, "Oh, dude, why? Why'd you do that?"
But I feel like he kind of realized that there's something about that. It's kind of okay to put some drama into the story, and it was okay to get outside of his own head a little bit, and put some things that maybe even he wanted to put in there, like, maybe it'd be more interesting with a love story. I don't know. And I felt like that was almost in a way his overcoming, and even his, whatever it was, alter ego brother, his way of overcoming his own writer's block and neuroses,
Well, Donald Kaufman could be like his inner voice.
Yeah.
Of like, I could go this way. And he's having a conversation with himself during the writing process. And Donald Kaufman is like the mainstream Hollywood typical version of a story. And he doesn't want to go that route. He's fighting with his own internal voice. And that internal voice is manifested as his twin brother in this movie, Donald Kaufman, because he says some ridiculous things in this movie, like his idea for the serial killer movie. Mom called it psychologically taught. Like all that, I'm sure he's woken up in the middle of the night or something in a sweat and just kind of going, maybe I should write a movie like Seven. Maybe that would help. Maybe that would help my career. So he does listen to Robert McKee in a way. You have to wow them in the end. For me, at the first time, I was like, you didn't wow me. You disappointed me by deciding to do that. But then I sort of realized, actually, it's a brilliant conceit and compromise in a way. To just like, it's like him coming to terms with the fact that this version of storytelling exists. Yeah. And it exists for a reason because people like that stuff and it's okay to like that stuff. I was just like, what on earth would Susan Orlean, somebody who was given an assignment to adapt her material, and out came this, to where, the screenwriter is essentially putting himself in this material. That seems, again, very selfish to do, but I think she was in shock when she first read this adaptation. She was like, this is going to ruin my career if people perceive me to be this way. Like, that's actually what she thought at first. But then she came to terms and suddenly went, wait a minute, this is a movie. This isn't me. this is somebody's interpretation of my material. And even if it's not about flowers, and like the whole movie isn't about that, it's about disappointment. It's about not finding that orchid in the end. It's still that's still there. That's still within, like every character almost experiences disappointment and longing and disconnection and obsession. All those things that are actually in her book are in this movie, just in very metaphysical, weird, twisted ways that Charlie Kaufman, of course, is able to pull off. And this is a script that I think is kind of ingenious in that it just sort of wraps around itself.
Like the snake eating something.
Yeah. That's what I thought when I was watching. Like, this is kind of like that in screenplay form, which kind of makes it amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think he kind of gets to have it both ways in a way.
Yeah.
Because he had the ending of her being disappointed by the ghost orchid, like, oh, it's just a flower. But then he had the ending, that would have been the one written by his twin brother, where the like you said, everything he said he was going to do, the orchid becomes drugs, and there's a chase, and they fall in love. Like, I even remembered when she was taken as a drug, he said to, in the very beginning to Tilda Swinton, I don't want it to become a drug.
Yeah, exactly. There doesn't need to be sex, and of course we see Meryl Streep on a porn site at one point.
But I mean, yeah, and hopefully the author would realize that it's kind of, a parody of whatever Hollywood storytelling and writing and writer's block and writers' conferences, and that it's not, I don't think it's meant at all to present what really happened. I mean, if anything, it would be the parts where it's actually using her writing, based on what she said in the article. But yeah, I think but it's kind of, he kind of gets to have it both ways. He gets to have that movie that would have been written in that more restrained way, and then the fun part. And, well, not that it's not fun, but it's two different parts. The more mass appeal part, I guess you could say. But I think, yeah, you kind of nailed it. The one, to me, the line, and I didn't write it down exactly, that kind of summarizes this movie is when she said everything in life is like a ghost orchid, or there's many things in life like it, fantastic, fleeting, and a little outreach. I think that's what it was.
Yeah, that's really
and that's
beautiful.
Like one of his pet themes, too. I feel like that's just kind of runs through all his movies, is idealism, and when you get what you want, it's not really what you expect, and it's not fulfilling in the way.
It's putting things on a pedestal
exactly.
again. Yeah. And
so
just realizing the reality of, oh yeah, this isn't going to change my life.
Right. It's just a flower. I think that's what she said. It's just a flower.
Yeah. But the flower represents something. I really it also captures longing in a way too, because I think Charlie Kaufman as a person has been happily married for quite some time, but just the portrayal of the lonely writer in a room, trying to the inner monologue that starts this movie, and him talking, or what you're hearing, what he's thinking as he's trying to write, is so relatable. Like, if you're really struggling to write something, you're like, maybe if I drink some coffee, that'll help me. And then if I write something, then I'll treat myself for writing. I've had those conversations in my own head, which is kind of eerie when that happens in a movie, where it's like, oh yeah, I've done that, or I've felt that, or I've experienced that. Yeah, there's just a lot of insight to the writing process that feels really relatable.
Yeah.
Throughout this movie.
I think the jump from this, this kind of was really inventive in a lot of the ways, being John Malkovich was, but I think it was really relatable, a lot more relatable, because, you never, it's funny because the whole movie is about being inside someone's head, right? But I feel like you don't really get inside their heads as much as you do in his head in Adaptation, in terms of his, internal thoughts. And I think that really kind of works in its favor to add a lot more kind of empathy and relatability.
I think it's a matter too of relatability with the fact that we actually can't find a magic portal that would take us into a celebrity's head, but we can relate to sitting in front of a computer trying to write something. So it sort of makes, we've never written a screenplay or had to adapt somebody's book because it was an assignment necessarily, but I just think I understand his neuroses. I understand like his tendency to doubt himself a lot, but also like just the the loneliness of being a writer too is really well captured here. And like and that where he's like comparing all these flowers to something, and then he's comparing all the women to something.
Oh, yeah.
That whole sequence is kind of beautiful.
I thought about that too. No, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that also reminded me a lot of that kind of theme. It's like, you could imagine a life with each one of those, people, and that would be kind of like, like a different kind of flower, a different kind of ideal that you would have that would turn out differently.
And I think we can all relate to that. Even if we're, happy in a relationship with somebody, it's very easy to like have a brief fleeting moment of, oh, what if I was with that person? Or what was that person like? And then, of course, once we get to know them, we're like disappointed, which comes up quite a bit. And especially in the next movie we're going to talk about, which to me, at the time, when I saw Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, I kind of broke down a bit.
I'm not a concept, Joel. I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. I'm not perfect.
I can't see anything that I don't like about you.
But you will.
Right now, I can't.
But you will. You will think of things, and I'll get bored with you and feel trapped, because that's what happens with me.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
I was very overwhelmed. I saw this with my two best friends at the time, out in Northwest Indiana. It was interesting to see it with my friend Denny because we loved manic, wacky, crazy Jim Carrey. And, he often when we made movies, he sort of exhibited the same sort of flailing arms wackiness that he did with Dumb and Dumber and his early career. And then we watched this movie together at a very vulnerable time, especially for me, because I had broken up with my fiance fairly recently, within the last 6 to 8 months. So seeing a movie like this, obviously I was prone to be a mess watching a movie about breaking up and how messy relationships can be. But this is not directed by Spike Jonze. It's directed by Michel Gondry, and we have talked about Michel Gondry on this podcast way long ago, maybe even a decade ago at this point, which is scary. But I talked about how much that movie meant to me then. It still means a lot to me now, but I also don't feel as strongly connected to the mopey Jim Carrey character, Joel, as I first did when I was in my mid-20s. Now, most of these movies now, your Garden State, your High Fidelities, with like your Manic Pixie Dream Girl character, kind of irk me a little bit more, because I don't view relationships in that extent of, I'm depressed, this girl will save me. I don't think of it that way. And a lot of these movies sort of portray it that way, but this one isn't necessarily that either. It shows a lot of the messiness of being in a relationship. It shows the possibilities of it not working out, in my opinion, at the very end. But at the same time, what it all comes down to is that this is a screenplay I wish I had written, because it tackles everything I'm interested in: the brain, memory, relationships, the way we interact with one another, the things we say, all these things. This is what got me interested in neuroscience, is this movie. I basically had this epiphany of wanting to study the brain and go into psychology because I'd seen this movie. So that's why it means a lot to me, is that it kind of changed the trajectory briefly for my life. It's not something I stuck to, obviously, but I still love psychology. And it also has my all-time favorite music score ever by John Bryan. So even if I have like reservations about fully embracing every little thing, or, now I think of Joel as just kind of somebody I can't imagine being in a relationship with necessarily, because he's so detached, and I don't know what Kate Winslet sees in this guy, Clementine. I don't see what Clementine sees in Joel. But I love everything about it anyway, even if I have these reservations. And I know, like, the original story had a little bit more fleshed out with Kirsten Dunst's character. Like, it started out with her thinking back to what happened at Lacuna with, really quickly, before I hear your thoughts on it, we got to give a brief moment of recognition and silence for the great Tom Wilkinson as Dr. Marizak. I think that's how you say his name.
Yeah.
Incredible in this, incredible just about everything. He's just one of those welcome character actors that anytime he showed up, I was very happy to see him. So kind of wild timing since we just lost him recently. But there's a lot going on too in this movie that I think is very profound, very special, and it's incredibly well edited when you're jumping around from Joel's internal experience, his memories, and what's going on in reality. But what are your thoughts, partner, on Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, a movie about being in a relationship?
Yeah, no, I love what you said, and I think just the concept of this movie is so great that if it, even if it's a little messy, it's just something that gives you so much to think about in terms of relationships. And I feel like I've heard a couple different origin stories for this idea, but one was based on a psychological paper about, erasing memories. But
the initial idea was Charlie Kaufman talking with a friend. What if somebody gave you the card that Joel gets at one point from from his friends?
Yeah. But to say something that wasn't really something that you already said, I agree with a lot of things you said about the relationship. And I think one of the points of the movie is kind of like that it's worth exploring those relationships anyway, even if they might not work out, even if they're not ideal. And it's interesting that you mentioned Mary and the Kirsten Dunst character, because what I was thinking too is that's really interesting that she's the one who decides to give everyone back their tapes, and that it's a terrible procedure and everything, after they were trying to erase her memory about the affair with the doctor. Because here's something to me, out of everything, that's something that would never work out or turn into something in reality, would be her affair with this married doctor with
much
kids.
older doctor.
Much older. No matter what, it just wouldn't be something that, and it seemed like it had a history of happening. It wouldn't be something that would ever end well, but she still didn't want to erase it. And to me, that was really interesting. Like, she just wanted to have it anyway as a part of her life, And I think that kind of encapsulates one of the big themes of the movie, that,
Yeah, I agree.
You need that life experience. You need to go through it. And also, maybe you're going to keep repeating it if you don't know that it happened.
That's what I think. That's what I think the loop at the end indicates, is that they're going to keep repeating it.
Yep.
But then again, like, they're not going to keep repeating the procedure necessarily. It's just that they're going to possibly keep trying, and it's just not going to happen. Because I don't think they're going to be do you think that they're a good couple? Like, that's the one thing I watched thinking about it this time, was like, are they a good match, really? I mean, they have moments, for sure. I just don't know. They seem like vastly different people, to where, that conversation about them having a baby, it's like, they seem like they're in completely different wavelengths, where I'm watching and I go, I don't know if this would be a healthy relationship for the two of them, that maybe they should actually just move on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems like they're just so, like, if you were checking OkCupid boxes or something, like, how impulsive are you? How much do you like to drink? How much do you like to go out? They are, like, completely
introvert and extrovert.
Different, yeah. And I mean, most of what you see of their relationship doesn't seem like they're super happy together. So it's interesting. But there's obviously something that they're just kind of like drawn to about each other. And I think, like I said, I think that's kind of like one of the points I keep going back to is even if it's not something that's going to really work out for you, you kind of need those life experiences, especially in relationships, and you grow from that. And I think it's something I told you before, like when it's kind of like they know, I feel like in the end when they're listening to the tapes and they're saying, oh, I get really controlling and I get really, dependent or whatever, or needy to each other. They kind of know, I feel like, that it probably doesn't have a high chance of working out, but then they just say, okay, like we're going to do it anyway. And
that's kind of beautiful.
Yeah. There's something really beautiful about it. It's almost like saying it's worth. And I mean, even if you want to, like he does, these really big philosophical themes, think it in terms of a lot of life experiences, are going to be that way. This is going to be worth having. It's going to be worth living through this because it's going to be hard. And a lot of it is anyway,
Most
say,
relationships are hard, whether with your parents or yourself.
Yes.
There's challenges that come with it, and even work relationships are challenging. So I don't know. Once you start getting other people into the equation, you gotta tread lightly. You gotta be careful. You gotta be, but you also should be open and willing, because we're social creatures. I mean, some people are fine living a life of solitude and completely being alone, but in the end, it's better for you in the long run to form relationships, even if they're complicated ones, or ones where you feel tension, or ones where you feel a sense of. I think that's what I worry about sometimes in my own life is just, I feel a lot of anxiety around this one person or this other person, but come on, you can't have amazing connections with every single person where everything feels right. Mm-hmm. There's going to be the people in the world that you just don't click with. And I don't think you should just necessarily because that's the one thing psychologists and therapists will tell you is try your best not to be around those people that make you feel negative. And I agree with that to some extent, but then I also think it's kind of normal. I think, because negative energy just comes from getting out into the world. Yeah. From getting on the train, from going to work. You're going to experience some negative relationships in your life. Why not let your brain adapt to it like anything else? I think it's important to try. And I think this movie is basically saying take the good with the bad, or take the bad with the good, however you want to put it. And so I feel a sense of it's such a bittersweet ending, because it feels like they are going to give it a go, but it's probably not going to work out. Yeah, I get that too. And I almost feel like I don't want to say it's a loop, but I feel like it's something that's going to keep happening if they don't, or that they don't. Any relationship they have, I think it's going to keep happening. For some reason, they're drawn to each other, and I think that they just need to experience whatever this is going to be, this relationship, and maybe there's one universe where it does work out, but no matter what, I think it's just I have a feeling. It's just an experience that they need to have and live through to know what it's like, What do you think about the Elijah Wood subplot? Because I didn't like that. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one thing I'm like, you probably didn't need this, really. He's just kind of there. I mean, I like Elijah Wood and I love Mark Ruffalo. I mean, I love him in everything, but it's just kind of a weird decision to suddenly have him be this little stalker guy, basically trying to groom and seduce Clementine in that way. It's just kind of an odd choice to throw that in there, because I don't know if it was necessary. I don't dislike it to the point of it ruining the experience of watching the movie, but it's just kind of an odd decision to. I guess it's like the darkness of Charlie Kaufman seeping in, where he'd think if somebody was able to get a hold of all of Joel's stuff and figure out who, basically manipulate himself into somebody's life, they could do that. And I think some people try to do that nowadays using social media. Like I try to, somebody might try to find out everything they possibly can about a person and then like pretend that they know, like, I know it's a weird idea that it doesn't belong in this movie, really.
Yeah, I was trying to think, I didn't really care for that and trying to think if it was necessary. I know he's the one who kind of goes down and tries to warn her too, toward the end that's going to happen, I think. But
yeah,
I still don't think it was really necessary. But I mean, you did just kind of bring up one other thing I thought I was thinking about the movie, which is, he was trying to take everything that was good about the relationship and use it to seduce her. And I feel like when Joel was having the procedure, it was like every once in a while something would come up and he'd be like, no, like, just let me keep this one. I just want to keep this one.
Keep
and,
the good with the bad.
It's not like that all or nothing thing. Yeah, you don't get to pick or choose if you're doing this. It's like, and that's how we learn and grow. I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy, but that's how we learn and grow from our life is, our bad and our good memories. So I feel like you would be kind of emotionally stunted in a lot of ways if you would be able to do that.
Yeah, and how do you feel about Kate Winslet's character as Clementine? Because at first I was thinking it's kind of a reductive manic pixie dream girl type performance, and like the initial thinking was like, let's just have her play the manic Jim Carrey role and Jim Carrey play the sad, sullen, depressed role. Like they're sort of switching roles and expectations of what we think of them as performers. And then I suddenly realized, the majority of what we're seeing is through Joel's perspective of Clementine. And so maybe he thinks of her in that way, and it's less about the portrayal or the writing of this character necessarily. But I don't know. I mean, I love Kate Winslet. So I love her in this movie very much. But what are your thoughts about her as a character?
It's interesting because they reference this other girlfriend that he had, Naomi, I think it was, that was supposedly more.
There are deleted scenes if you're curious. There are deleted scenes on YouTube if you want to know more about her.
And obviously he was kind of bored. I mean, even though he seems kind of boring himself, it's like I feel like he wanted and maybe wasn't healthy for him. He kind of pinned his ideals on some kind of woman that was going to bring him out of his shell, And she even said that, like, I'm not going to be able to save you or, be your concept or whatever, I think. But I think, especially considering that's what he was looking for, was someone who was really,
impulsive
and vivacious and everything, to be able to
Joel is
make
very
him,
controlled,
right, to be able to make him feel more alive, or like he could come, like I think he felt, and maybe he needed someone to be that much so to kind of pull him out of his shell. But like, even for that, I didn't feel like she went overboard or anything, honestly. I thought she was outgoing, but not really over the top.
And
I
flawed.
Thought it was good performance.
She's an alcoholic. Yeah. It's clear, and I think she would even admit that.
I think the first time you saw her on the train, she was like drinking from a flask and having cocaine or something.
Cocaine? I missed that.
Was it? Or she was sniffing something. Maybe it wasn't.
I think it was just nasal spray. At least I hope so.
Okay. Oh, okay. I just assumed it was a drug. I'm probably wrong.
Gosh, that whole train meeting is just... it's so weird because, it seems so awkward and strange, but it's also because they both had the procedure at that point, which makes it understandable why they're both like having a disconnect. Like she even mentions Huckleberry Hound, Clementine, oh my darling, all that.
Right.
And he goes, I've never heard of that. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that's because it's been erased. It's just so well written and so well edited. And Michel Gondry is so playful with certain things. Like I think about how at one point we go from the Barnes & Noble bookstore back into Joel's friend's apartment or house. And just as a side note, I don't know why I find like just I wish there was more deleted scenes too of like David Cross and Jane Addams, because I love them. I almost wish they were a couple, because they're so good in this movie, and they're so every time they're appearing in things, I'm happy, and I just love David Cross's I'm building a birdhouse while he's smoking a joint. It's so good. But yeah, it's just everything about it is wonderful. But like I was saying, the way Michel Gondry has these playful touches that you would see early on in his own music video work, where it's all in camera and he does like set breakdowns and buildings disappearing. Just a lot of weird, interesting touches throughout. And he was not always easy to work with because he would have these insane ideas of how to do a scene without any effects. And it would be exhausting for someone like Jim Carrey, because he'd basically have to be two Jim Carreys in one scene without any cuts.
Yeah. I think I heard that or read that somewhere too. I will say, here's an interesting thing. I thought Kate Winslet's character was a little more believable than his, actually. Like, I felt like his was a little too down,
restrained,
or
reserved.
Yeah, like he had nothing. Really.
Well, she even says that about him. Like, what do you write in that journal? And it's like it's blank. There's nothing like. But that's what like. Could you see yourself being attracted to a guy like Joel? Probably not. I mean, that's just me. Maybe again, it's like projection to some degree too, but also like, I hope I wasn't that bad. Like I know I have depression, and I know I can be a little reserved. And even when we first met, you thought I was like just kind of not all there or something. Like I wasn't very
present.
Yeah. And I think that's what happens when you're depressed. But we don't know how much about like Joel's backstory outside of like, we see his subconscious, we see his repressed memories, we see that incredible sequence of him as a kid under the table, having an interesting sort of attachment to his mother. So it's just like there's a lot going on that we sort of have to figure out and project ourselves.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe there's a reason behind that, because he's the maybe he did kind of define himself too much by his relationship, or was looking for that as his salvation or identity. So that could be the reason for that.
I think even at one point they like comment on his apartment. It's like it's kind of dull here. It's like and I think he's sort of thought of in that way. And I don't know, a lot of people would say that Charlie Kaufman's protagonists are depressed and kind of cut off and not fully present, or lacking a certain identity that they're in search of. And I think that's true. I mean, and I don't know, Kate Winslet's character here, I could see the appeal of somebody like that, because they're magnetized themselves to you in a way, and in a good way for the most part. And they have had a lot of great memories. They've had a lot of good moments together. So it makes sense why they're still drawn to each other in the end. And I think it's I think also the score towards the end, like the whole moment of the house falling apart.
I walked out the door. There's no memory left.
Come back and make up a goodbye at least. Let's pretend we had one.
Bye, Joel.
I love you.
Maybe in Montauk.
Like I start getting really emotional when he's sort of realizing he should have stayed. Like, I wish I had stayed. And she's like talking to him about, what if you stayed this time? That still really moves me. And the music playing, and then her saying, meet me in Montauk, which still confuses me, because I don't like we're inside Joel's memory and Joel's head at that point. So how would she know to meet him in Montauk? Because that's not, I mean, I guess they were just drawn there for reasons. I mean, I don't know. That whole moment of like them basically reuniting in the winter in Montauk together is interesting to me because we're just seeing it from Joel's perspective, but why did Clementine herself decide to go back to Montauk?
I could have sworn, but I'm sure this would have been all edited, that I read somewhere that there was a version where Clementine erased him a few times too. But I'm sure that Charlie Kaufman fixed all that before this version of the film. But maybe there was some, that's why I don't know if that's kind of like a hint that maybe she had, that too, or I don't know.
That could be.
I can't really tell. Or maybe it's just like that idea that, they're kind of, no matter what, they're kind of like drawn to experience this together, in some way or another.
Yeah. Some cosmic force has brought them together. Or it's just the genius of Charlie Kaufman, which is, seeing this movie and certainly even going back to it, it's hard not to get a little emotional because how can somebody watch this movie and not think about their own relationships or the experiences that they've had, or when they've broken up with somebody? Oh, I wish I could not think about them. To where, like, wouldn't it be great if this procedure existed? But this also shows you why it's a good thing that this procedure isn't available, because it is as he says at one point. Well, it is actually a form of brain damage. Yeah. Ooh, and that whole sequence too. Once he starts realizing he's in his own head, that like montage or that entire sequence of him like going, "Oh, I'm inside my own head now." I don't know why, but that actually gives me anxiety. Like when I see it, it just makes me think of like I have too much awareness of what's going on right now, and I think he's experiencing that. So I feel that too in some sort of weird way, where it's like I think I'm thinking too much, which is what this whole show is really about: thinking too much and then saying it out loud,
overanalyzing.
Yeah, saying it out loud into a microphone, in hopes that people are enjoying it, and I'm sure they are. Because you're here. Sharon, you're here. And I'm so glad you are. Every day.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyway, can we talk about my second favorite movie of all time?
Sure.
You ever heard of it? It's called Synecdoche, New York. I've never talked about it ever.
Really?
No, of course I'm joking. I've talked about it probably too much.
But on the show, have you done... That's what I thought you meant. Yeah.
I don't think I've done a full-blown episode on it, because if I had, you would be involved.
That was the whole impetus for this one, right?
I wanted to talk to you about it, and I promise, when we do this again next year, you're choosing. I'm not going to say anything. You're choosing whoever you want to talk about.
Death comes faster than you think.
The idea is to do a massive theater piece.
What was this shoot for?
Plays.
Like theater plays?
Have I disappointed you somehow?
Everyone is disappointing. The more you know someone.
I don't know what I'm doing.
Knowing that you don't know is the most essential step to knowing,
I want you to beg me on your knees for a kiss.
We need to investigate the essence of each being. You're weirdly close to what I've visualized for this character.
Glad to be weirdly close. You smell weird.
What do I smell like?
It's like you're menstruating. I don't know.
I don't menstruate, so I don't know. I can smell like I'm menstruating.
You tell me.
I've been following you for 20 years, and I've learned everything about you. So hire me, and you'll see who you truly are.
I'm just a little person.
Talk about your first experience, talk about your personal history of it. Just go off, man. Pretend you're Charlie Kaufman writing a script right now.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Well, the whole movie is a lot.
But I'll just go ahead and start by the story I've told you many times before, but not everyone else. The first time I watched this movie, it was just on DVD from Netflix, I believe. I was just I didn't finish it because I thought it was too depressing. And I just didn't get this movie at all the first time because I think I was just watching, I was watching it kind of like it was a regular movie, which it's not, like a drama. And I was just so depressed. And, I turned it off and my ex-husband came home. And, we both loved Charlie Kaufman and were excited about it. And he's like, oh, what did you think of his? Like, I had to turn off his, he gets divorced. His father dies. His mother dies. All this. It's so depressing. He's sick. He keeps getting more sick. It's like.
Such an uplifting experience.
And he started watching it, and I was in the other room, and I could just hear him laughing. And I was like, laughing. And I came in, I was like, how can you laugh at this movie? And he's like, this movie's funny. It's like a dark comedy. And in particular, one thing I could not even believe was that he had lost his own father, and he was laughing at the part that the
we don't know who calls. I'm guessing it's the hospital.
Someone called him from. And what I love, which is really indicative of everything in this movie, really, is he seems to be on the phone for like less than a minute. He's like, yeah, they told me this. It was the longest, saddest deathbed speech anyone ever gave. It was a long, drawn out, suffering death. And then they were burying him in his coffin. Had to be filled with cotton balls because there was so little left of him. And I did not realize that was supposed to be funny because who says that, about it's always like you died. They died peacefully in their sleep, They wished everyone well and said they loved everyone. Aww. So it's, but it's very darkly humorous, But yeah, there was so much I didn't get about this movie the first time, the dark humor like that. And I mean, I didn't notice the little details, like the way time passes in the beginning, like the date is fast forwarding on the newspaper and on the milk carton. It like jumps a month ahead and just all those little weird things, actually all throughout the beginning. And I think it's Christmas and New Year's and it just moves really fast. And all throughout the movie, he kind of plays around with time. And then there's kind of deeper, I don't know how deep you want me to get, but it's like...
we can't talk about that on the podcast. But I think you can go as deep as you want on this movie. Because, it's... I guess I probably have spoken in hyperbole many times on this show. But, it took a while. It took about 3 viewings. But this is when I said I think Charlie Kaufman is a genius. Mm-hmm. A true genius in every way. Like, I just couldn't believe what I was experiencing when I saw this movie.
I mean, what were your first impressions of it? Because I'm guessing that you probably got it more than I did.
Not the first time. The first time, Colin and I saw this together, and we both walked out, and I said, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
And I told him, but not in a bad way. I can't wait to see this again. I don't know if I love it yet. And that's happened to me with some of my favorite movies, where it's like, my brain isn't ready.
It's a movie. I don't think there's any way that someone could process it all at the same time. Mm-hmm. And in particular, because there's things in the beginning that the beginning is the
ending is built into the beginning
that show up later. So it's kind of like foreshadowing, mm-hmm. like the Tom Noonan character keeps showing up earlier in the movie, and then he only becomes a major character later in the movie. And just stuff like that, that would be impossible to know the first time you watched it, like what that meant, so it's definitely not something I don't think you could get. I would even argue from several viewings, there's something new, there's new details every time. It's like so nuanced, and there's an apocalypse in the end, and
it takes place in the
weird
future.
Details in that.
Yeah, it's everything. Like, I mean, I know there was a movie that came out recently called Everything Everywhere All at Once, but that's what this movie could also be called, because it feels like everything to me. Like every feeling, every human experience, every fear, every sort of humorous response to something dark.
Yeah.
Which you relate to. You have that sense of humor.
But at the same time, it's really just kind of about this one man's life, Caden Cotard. And, you know, the Cotard delusion is like a belief that you're dying, right? You're always dying, or dying you're from the inside or something.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of wordplay like that in this movie too, which he seems to always love.
Yeah. I don't even know what that means. There's a lot throughout, you know. Again, someday, someone, I don't think it would be me, because I don't know if I could handle writing a book, but there will be a book written about this movie someday, hopefully within our lifetimes, of all the things, the references, the ideas, the Jungian psychology, the, you know, what the burning house means.
Oh, right. I mean, here's the thing. Yeah, it really is just kind of about one. Well, it's about a lot more than that. But I mean, it's one of the things it's strongly about is one man's life. And, you know, that's one thing you can go.
And how do you
online,
contain one man's life?
Yeah. And, or how much one man's life contains. And you could go online and read all kinds of really interesting, you know, analyses of it. There's just so many details in it. But I will just mention a couple that I think are really like interesting. Is the movie begins, you know, some people have theorized it's purgatory or a suicide dream or something, and it begins with the clock changing from 7:44 to 7:45 when he wakes up in the morning, and they're talking about fall and death and everything. And in the end, he's being counted down to 7:45. You know, now you're 7:43, now you're 7:44, right before he dies. I hope that's.
And the director
spoilers.
voice in his ear says "die." It's the last word you hear.
Says "die" right after he passes 7:44, and there's a clock. Again, what time? I watched this like 10 times before I noticed this. There's a clock in chalk on the wall that says 7:45. So I feel like that cannot be a coincidence. That means something. And then there's another part where, I mean, there's like wordplay and mishearings all throughout the movie, which I feel like are just
all throughout
something
most of his
he
movies.
does. Yeah, in like all of his movies. Constant, yeah, like not mishearings. But one thing, when he's at his psychiatrist and he first gets this MacArthur Genius Grant to write a play. You know, he's saying like how, you know, he wants to do it before he dies, you know, that just keeps coming up again and again. And he said, how young are people when they start to write? And his psychiatrist said, you know, there's this little Winky who wrote this book at the age of 4 and gives him the book, which I guess is about like an anti-Semite Nazi or something written by a 4-year-old. And then she says, oh, well, he died when he was 5. And then he says, Caden says,
why would somebody?
Why? I'm trying to remember the exact line. Or no, yes, he says, why would somebody kill himself? I think that's what it is. And she says, I don't know. Why did you? And he says, what? And she says, I don't know. Why would you? And that is another thing of the 4 turning into 5. There's a few of them in the movie, but I feel like there's something significant about that. But that's the only like deep. Like I said, you could go really like.
He even perceives his daughter as being a 4-year-old when she's actually turning 11.
That too, and he continues to think of Olive as 4 years old throughout the movie. You know, as she ages and becomes an adult. There's a few things like that. So I feel like there's kind of some validity to the interpretation that there's something. There's some kind of resistance of the number 4 turning into 5 and its connection with death or something. So.
Yeah, and Hazel at one point has 3 sons, but she describes them as twins, which is really weird.
Yeah. It's like, why would you? Yeah. I mean, I feel like that means something.
It probably does.
Just
Do you think Caden actually killed himself? Did he jump off that building and was successful? I don't know if there's proof of that actually happening or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. And it's like
because Sammy
reenacts it in the end, and then he tells him Caden tells him I didn't really jump, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know what that means. But then
I don't either. Like if you're saying the end is built in the beginning, maybe we are watching a death dream unfold, because it would explain like the lack of logic through a lot of things, and I don't know. There's just like, how could he not have known his wife has that tattoo on her back?
Oh yeah,
the whole time. Everybody has tattoos.
I've never seen that.
It's just like things like that don't make sense in reality, but they would make sense in a dream. And yeah, when we mentioned the Cotard delusion, and just like the whole play within a play, and like this idea of like, I have to write an amazing work of art that sums up everything that I want to say. And perhaps even that's Charlie Kaufman's approach to writing this movie. It was like, I want something, because originally it was going to be him and Spike Jonze making a horror movie, and they all talked about real life practical things like trips to the doctor, or like, you know, your pee being a weird color, or things that are real that happen to the human body that are actually terrifying. And they were going to build a horror movie off of all these different ideas. And then it sort of just, Spike Jonze went on to do Where the Wild Things Are instead, and this sort of just became his own project, and he wanted to do this on his own anyway, and it became what it's become, and it's so many different things. And anybody watching this can have a completely different read or interpretation on it. It's very referential, and certainly there's the transition of him becoming Ellen by the end. That's a little
didn't even mention
puzzling. I mean, in a good way. Like, I'm kind of like, that's interesting. Why would somebody mistake him for being a woman? And, you know, Michelle Williams at one point says to, you smell like you're menstruating, and like just little hints and things like that. Or the 911 operator saying "ma'am" when he's yelling out.
They say Ellen too, or Adele says Ellen. Yeah.
So I wonder what all that ends up being, and maybe that's why people are frustrated sometimes with this movie, because it wasn't universally beloved outside of people like Ebert, who got it and just loved it and called it the best film of the decade. Which, you know, of course, I wish I could have had a conversation with him about this movie, because it became like a significant work of art in my lifetime, and it still is. And every time I watch it, I sort of break down crying tears of joy, because I'm like, I'm so glad this exists in the world. You know, again, great score by John Bryan, that, you know, by the end, especially once he starts walking through, it seems like the end of the world basically has happened, and he's just left there by himself. And then, I don't know, I find all of this movie to be incredibly hilarious and moving and terrifying. Like, I mean, it makes me a little anxious once he starts cleaning. Like it almost seems like he's having a panic attack, but he's dealing with it by cleaning. And I think that's happened to me a couple of times, where it's just like, I can't handle what's going on in life. I need a distraction. I need to be doing something right now. So yeah, and like what's going on the TV, like he's seeing his future death while and then suddenly he decides to start compulsively cleaning, and on the TV they're saying things like, your bride has left you. And like, it's funny, but it's also just sad and dark. I think that's what's so crazy about this movie, is the tonal balance, which some people may not feel that it does successfully, but I think it does beautifully and consistently throughout. Some people did call this one of the worst films ever made, which is just hilarious to me, because it's, to me, one of the greatest movies ever made. So I don't understand necessarily how somebody could be dismissive entirely of this whole experience, and watching it now also in light of losing one of our all-time great actors, Philip Seymour Hoffman, adds a whole other layer, watching him slowly disintegrate and die. But yeah, I mean, the whole cast is great. This is one of my favorite ensembles, clearly, that's ever been in a movie. Everybody from, Philip Seymour Hoffman to Tom Noonan, who Kaufman wanted to work with because of What Happened Was. What Happened was one of Charlie Kaufman's favorite movies. So it felt like all the pieces were in place to create what remains, I think, his masterpiece. Like, everything about this movie feels heartbreaking and sad and hilarious. Like, there are things that are extremely funny throughout this movie, and people mishearing things, and him having a sense of disconnect from even the people that he's supposed to be closest to. But I don't know. It's a surrealistic conceit that I can certainly see just, summarizing as a death dream. And I feel that way watching it sometimes. I think it's like somebody's life flashing before their eyes in different ways, I guess. And his instinct is to try and capture what's happening in his mind through by making a play. And then, of course, what happens? It becomes a play within 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 a play. I just don't know. I mean, it's one of those movies where I'm like, everybody just watch it, because you're going to have a completely different take than maybe another person would. So I hope you do watch it. I hope you do love it. And if you don't, tell me why. I'd be curious. Because I just have a completely different response and reaction to nearly everything in this movie. And I do find probably the most emotionally satisfying relationship in all of Charlie Kaufman's movies for me is Caden and Hazel. Because they try to be close and he can't, because he's crying and he's having trouble in bed. Things like that really, strike a chord. And also her death scene makes me really really emotional.
I have a title. The Obscure Moon, lighting an obscure world.
I think it might be too much.
Because it's clear that they wanted to be together, but they couldn't for whatever reason. Maybe it's because he was lost in his own head. Maybe he was just too self-consumed to actually experience true love. And that makes it sad that they weren't able to be together except in the end.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a movie that I can get why people wouldn't like it.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to handle and take in, and it is very depressing sometimes. And the humor is not really... The humor is dark humor, or it's surreal humor. Which a lot of it is took me a long time to get, or it's like wordplay or stuff like that. It's not really broad humor. But I mean, the more I've seen it, I will say the more funny, the more I get the surrealism, the little details he's kind of playing around with, the more kind of I pick up on about his life, that I know is coming. And I also think when you get older, it's different. Like the older you get. Yeah. And I've heard other people say that too. Like I had a friend of mine who was watching it, and now he has kids and he's a little older, and he's like, whoa, that breakfast table scene is like how I feel like every day. It seems like
that's
a month passed.
Yeah. Well, as we get older, time seems to go faster.
But that's interesting too. They say it was a horror movie, because I think that's exactly what it is. It's like kind of a horror movie about, all these
death and dying
things you think about when you're adult, and the way your body's failing you and everything like that. Yeah.
The body fails so much. I mean, you can sort of dismiss it and say like he's a hypochondriac, but I don't know. There's things like, he is actually peeing blood at one point. Mm-hmm. I don't know, and that's a scary image. There's and even just like him having a seizure, I mean, there's like the hospital stuff and doctor stuff is scary.
It's almost a horror movie about aging, I would say, because that's all the stuff you deal with as you're aging, like more and more weird health issues, your parents dying, you're maybe if you're a parent, you're dealing with that, or a divorce maybe, or it's just like all those scary things you deal with, or even feeling regret or thinking you have to do something really big with your life before you die, which I think is a big part of it. He even says that. And I think everyone kind of feels that way. Like, I don't have much time left. I have to do this really big thing, before I die.
It doesn't even happen, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
The disappointment of not being able to fulfill that, but also maybe living your life is just enough. I don't know. I mean, it depends on the person. I guess I could say, like, oh yeah, I put a podcast together, I made some music, I did all this stuff. So I feel like, my life has been relatively creatively fulfilled in a way that I'm grateful for, but did I create a work of art like Synecdoche? No. And I that's fine. In the end, I don't know if anybody else could. The one question I have for you is something that I remember even early on. It might have even been Colin who asked this, is like, why are all these hot women attracted to Caden? Hazel, Tammy, Claire, all of them. Just like what would draw, like, because again, it's very similar to what we're talking about with Joel in Eternal Sunshine. He's not very pleasant to be around. He's kind of like always talking about death and dying and feeling sad and lonely and pathetic, and it's just kind of the same thing that I guess could turn people off from Charlie Kaufman as a writer. Is just a lot of his protagonists are really unhappy people. So do you think that it's a case of maybe all these women can help? Like that's, that same thing with Kate Winslet almost.
Well, I mean, he's older, and like, I think there's something that people are sympathetic to. I mean, this is kind of in his head too, so there could be some things that are, or at least I feel that way, some things are exaggerated, but I also think he's also more accomplished than someone like Joel. Like, I think he's an award-winning, right, the theater director, and obviously Claire is very attracted to him as a, being like a star of the theater world, and maybe even possibly helping her,
further her career.
Yes, yeah. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't genuinely believe that they're in love. Just sort of spontaneously happens. Like, that is just so funny when she's like, I think everybody knows we fucked. We had a daughter. And then all of a sudden the daughter's there and she's like 5 years old. Again, like time in this movie, it moves at a very illogical manner where it's just kind of like, how did this happen so quickly? And, if you see at one point, a guy is like ranting and raving in the street wearing a shirt that says it's the year 2025 or whatever or something. And I'm just like, what?
Yeah, I did pause that part because they say at one point, I think the movie starts in 2005. They show the date everywhere.
Yeah.
But then right. They say he's been at that warehouse, whatever point that is, for 17 years. So it's like, oh, it must be getting like around the time, this time or slightly later. And it was,
yeah. Makes me worry about this next year.
Yeah, which I just never thought about that part of it before, like what time the ending was actually set in. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I always think like if I die at 7:45, I'm going to be a little freaked out. That would be weird. I just had
to mention that because I feel like there's something there. I'm not going to mention there's lots of, like I say, you go online and see some really so much stuff. Out details and analysis, but I feel like there must be something to the 7:45 thing because it's just so prominent. I mean, and again, you wouldn't know that the first time you watched it. I mean, why would you remember the time that comes up on the alarm clock? You know what I mean? No one pays attention to that.
But pay close attention. Even the title of the movie shows up around that time. It says 7:45. And it's just weird within this past year, too, to see things like, what Nathan Fielder has done with The Rehearsal and Beau is Afraid. Like, there are things that are clearly influenced by Charlie Kaufman that are coming out now more than ever. And I'm sure A24 will probably put out movies that are influenced by Charlie Kaufman's work. But in particularly, I just think like something like Synecdoche is now heralded more, is now appreciated greatly, especially by other writers as being a significant work of art that they've responded to and feel like they want to almost make their own version of in a way, because I don't know how I can not watch something like Beau is Afraid and not think of Charlie Kaufman, because there's just like so much going on in that movie to an exhausting degree in a way for me with that movie. I think you liked it more than I did, but
yeah,
I just I love the first hour of Beau is Afraid. That's the part that makes me think of Synecdoche the most. Just the anxiety of living and going through day to day and having strange things happen left and right. But
I could see that. I think Synecdoche, New York is a lot more subtle than that movie.
100%. Yeah.
I could see like the surreal, but yeah, I feel like that one is way more out there. It's in terms of the tone and graphicness and everything.
Yeah. I know.
But I can see the influence. I see what you're saying.
So let's talk about what I consider to be a lesser work, but a still fascinating and interesting one, which would be Anomalisa, which came out a few years later, right? How much?
I think it was 2015.
Oh, yeah. It took him like 7 years to make another movie. That's wild. I think it's also because he has a hard time getting funding, and studios don't necessarily want to take on like his ideas because they don't think they're going to make him money. Like, I know at one point he's going to do a musical of some kind called Frank or Francis. Like, he really wanted to get that off the ground. It just never happened. I'm sure he's got scripts lying around that probably won't get produced for one reason or another. This one did. And it was a collaboration with Duke Johnson, I want to say. I think. Let me make sure. But
that sounds right.
I think I'm right. I just was so excited for something new from Charlie Kaufman to come out, even if it's a collaboration. And again, what makes this one very interesting is it's based on a play that he wrote. It was a staged radio play where it was very focused on the voices. And that's why at the very beginning of this podcast, I said the Theater of the New Ear, which was a series of plays that were done, I want to say live. So you had David Thewlis and Jennifer Jason Leigh and Tom Noonan all on a stage together performing this play. And I think the Coen brothers might have had a play. They just tried basically live radio plays like they used to do in the olden days. And this was his take on that. There was also another one that I will link to in the show notes because I want everybody to hear it. It's a hilarious play that Charlie Kaufman did featuring Hope Davis, Meryl Streep, and Peter Dinklage called Hope Leaves the Theater. I'm sorry I didn't send that to you beforehand. I just realized that. But I think it's incredible. And it's a very meta. They even talk about how Charlie Kaufman wrote this play as they're in the play. So that's great. I love that. But Anomalisa was the other one that he did. And it turned into a stop-motion animation puppet film. And I don't necessarily think it's up there with something like Synecdoche because it is very simplified in a way. Like, it's kind of the opposite of Synecdoche in terms of it really just being about one guy in one setting dealing with one feeling most of the time, like just sheer and utter loneliness and what he's about to do, and thinking back to his relationships and all that too. But I don't know. I watch this now and it is a very reductive feeling I get when I'm watching it, to think like it is just about a lonely dude who wants to get laid again, have an affair, a dissatisfied guy who just basically meets somebody and decides, you know what? I want to sleep with them before I go home to my wife and kid because I'm miserable. Maybe there's a lot more going on to it. And I'm sure because it's Charlie Kaufman, there probably is. But I don't get that strong, profound, philosophical impression that I do with the majority of his other work. What do you think of Anomalisa, Sharon? Because I don't know if I love it. I just mostly think it's good.
I actually like it a lot. I came around on it a bit because I do find this character creepy, and I find his kind of seduction of the young woman creepy. But I will say, okay, so I originally saw this movie at Fantastic Fest, and I just did not get it at all. I thought I kind of related to the wallflower character, Lisa, and I thought like, oh, someone's making her feel special and everything like that. And I think this movie is, now watching it again, it's not really about her individuality, but it's more about the sameness of everyone else. Because that's just what it is. I got that this time in his life. It's just all monotony. Every other, and it's funny in the credits, there's a woman who played Lisa and there's him. I noticed then everyone else is Tom Noonan.
Yes.
You can hear but I just thought it was funny, and it's very meaningful how that's how the credits were. Like, he doesn't even credit his wife or anything. It's everyone else. But and that just kind of sums up the movie. And, everyone else in his life, is voiced by Tom Noonan. But even something it took me, a rewatch to notice is they all have pretty much the same face too.
Oh yeah.
And it's all, regardless of age or gender or anything. So it's just kind of funny. I think they have different hairstyles or clothes maybe. But yeah, so it just kind of shows everything in his life is just kind of monotonous. He's so bored. He even says everything's so boring. And
well, he's kind of boring.
Yeah. I think this movie is, again, it's kind of about his theme of having this romantic ideal that is so unattainable that your life is just going to be kind of depressing if that's what you're depending on.
But he's married. Yeah, I would hope that he's... I don't know. I guess I don't feel sorry for him.
These movies are full of unhappy marriages.
That's true. No, you're right. But think of, this is kind of one of those things, too, we go back to with Cotard syndrome. He's staying at the Frigoli. Mm-hmm. The hotel's name is Frigoli.
Oh, does that mean something?
Yeah, it's a delusion where you think everybody has the same face.
Oh, okay. There you go. I should look that up. I should have known that was something. Okay.
Yeah. He loves those things. He loves those medical terms, the things that probably Oliver Sacks studied that I find interesting. But I guess it's just a matter of not really connecting with him as a person. I mean, I understand being lonely and certainly I'm staying in a hotel all by myself. I'm pathetic. I mean, I get that, but it's just, I don't know. I guess I'm leaning more towards he is kind of a creep, but I mean, at the very end, I understand he's not a happy person. I don't think he's ever going to be a happy person, no matter who he finds, even if he thinks he's going to find happiness with Lisa.
Yeah. I mean, I could kind of go into a little more of a long-winded theory I have because
I want you to, and I also mentioned I mentioned my theory, and it's very reductive, and it's just basically I don't know if Lisa exists in this world. I think it's a fantasy that he's having, because even when he goes to that toy store, quote unquote toy store, he sees a Japanese animatronic doll behind the counter. He's very transfixed by it. And it's the only time in the movie where there's a very quick fade, and then it's back into his hotel room. We don't see the doll anymore in his hotel room.
He had turnover service.
Yes. You're right. It could be under his bed. It could be in the bathroom hidden away. It could be in a closet. I don't know. But I don't want to say Lisa is the doll. And then he just basically, had this sex fantasy with this sex toy. That seems to me, again, reductive and just being if that's what this movie ultimately is, and I don't think even Charlie Kaufman would ever say that's what it is, because he's not that type of person. He's the type of person who goes, I want you to figure it out for yourself and whatever your interpretation is. So it could be that, or it could simply be that she represents The doll represents Lisa, which is where your take is, right?
Yeah, okay. I've got to take, because once
Please.
you told me that,
We're analyzing.
I did rewatch it. I was like, but I think you're onto something. I will just say this is not a likable character. I mean, he seems to have really traumatized this ex in his
that's
life.
what made me hate him more this time.
And it starts out with that and his memories of that, and then he's thinking about, he just doesn't connect with anything. And I mean, again, I noticed watching again this in the beginning of this movie, while this businessman, he's a customer service representative, is heading to the hotel and everything, nobody can understand what he's saying. It's another, which is something again I feel like it happens in all
every
his movies. But the taxi cab driver is like, "What? I can't hear you. I can't hear you." And the bellboy. So it's like, to me, it's just another one of those instances where it's kind of like this middle-aged, man who's kind of like walking like a ghost, through his own life. And I feel like this is kind of a theme with his characters too, like with Caden. They feel like, I mean, you can almost feel sorry for them because they're not connected to anything in their own life even, but it's almost like they caused a lot of it, and that's something I meant to say about Caden earlier. I mean, how much of it, you kind of wonder how much of it was his own neuroses, and I think you touched on that, and narcissism and everything caused these problems in his life. And he even says, I have psychological problems, and you see him taking Zoloft. But anyway.
There you go.
Now I'm going to go into my theory here. That was based off of your doll theory. Okay, so after his encounter with his ex that he goes, Michael Stone, he goes into the sex toy store and gets this antique Japanese doll, which is obviously a really weird thing to have there, and brings it back to his hotel. So it's after that. And then, Lisa, then he has this whole encounter with Lisa, who is the only person, he's met who has a different voice and a different face.
She also has a scar on her face, very much like the doll.
In the same place that the weird antique Japanese doll does. And at one point, it looks like he has kind of like a gear in his face that kind of looks like one of the doll. So it does seem like there's a connection there. But I'm trying to remember what the connection I made was. So she left, and in the morning, like I said, I feel like this is all about his kind of ideal, like putting people on a pedestal love. Mm-hmm. He starts to notice, of course, some of the flaws in her after one night.
Yeah.
Things like she eats with her mouth open,
Eating
She's
habits.
not my ideal love. Anymore. And her face starts to change, and her voice starts to change into the Tom Noonan voice that everyone else has. So then he goes and does his presentation, which kind of bombs, and she's sitting in the audience. She has the clothes that Lisa was wearing, but the Tom Noonan face. So then he goes home and he has the doll, which he gives to his son, and she starts singing. And
it's Lisa's voice.
And it's Lisa's voice.
Singing
yes.
it.
And again, it's the only different voice, only different face. She's singing this song. Lisa did mention Japanese. But here's what I think ties it all together that I never noticed. In the last scene, she's writing a letter to him like, "Oh, I understand why it didn't work out, Lisa." Her face is the Lisa face again. And she says in Japanese, English, the name means like goddess of heaven. And then it kind of like zooms over to her friend Emily's face, and it's like a
she has
normal.
Her own
face. She has like a feminine,
she
like
has her
a
own
distinct.
face.
She has a distinct feminine face. So I think that whole scene is about how he perceives the world. That she didn't look like that. He saw her, Emily, as another just puppet like everyone else. And I feel like that's the first time you see her that's outside of his view.
Oh.
And so that to me indicates that he, that's the way he saw the world, was Lisa was like this goddess, this goddess of heaven. And it was this idealistic, goddess. And like, the only thing that could kind of have that would be like a doll, like something that wouldn't be real. So that was the way I thought about it watching it again, because he did.
It is deeper than that.
There is a tie. It's like she does mention Japanese English dictionary. I thought if anything it was a symbol. It's a symbol of how what he saw or wanted could never be real. And then there's this song in the end that like perfectly summarizes that, and I don't remember all of the lyrics.
Is it the closing credits song?
Yeah, the closing credits song.
Yeah.
Like, my friends say you don't exist, but when I meet you, I won't be dead anymore or something.
When I see a face or hear a name or am introduced to someone new, it doesn't matter, they're all the same, and none of them is you. When I go to work or take a walk and watch what other people do, I'll listen to their idle talk. None of them is you. Where are you?
But he has that. It's almost like Joel in Eternal Sunshine. Like he expects someone to like. He has this really idealistic notion of love, that you're going to meet someone, they're going to save your life and make everything less boring and monotonous. And I mean, this is a notion that when you're young, it's very romantic, right? But when you're getting to the age that Michael Stone is, it just kind of like leads to depression and substance use and
drinking.
It doesn't age well. But you could say it's romantic.
I think it's better to think of it that way than just like he fucked a sex doll and that's the movie.
I think it's more interesting. But I have to admit, I feel silly because I didn't notice the first time that thing with Emily's face, or even the second time. I don't think I was like.
Well,
yeah,
but she's all. I mean, I never think of Emily as being a major character, but she is in that final reveal.
Yeah, I was
in a
like,
way.
that must mean something that they
focus on it.
show that face and focus, and it's different.
Yeah.
So I think it shows that you're in his head. It's his perception. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that closing song is so beautiful because I feel like that's
and her singing "Girls Just Want to Have Fun" is really, really beautiful too. I really liked. I mean, Jennifer Jason Leigh is a American treasure as far as I'm concerned, because everything she's in is incredible and one of my favorite actresses ever. So it was great to see her. I think this was the same year as Hateful Eight, if I'm not mistaken. Like, it almost felt like Jennifer Jason Leigh is going to win awards and she's back and she's going to be in everything. And she's most recently in the latest season of Fargo, which your dad loves. And it's really great. This new season of Fargo is one of the best ones yet.
Oh yeah, I do like her.
And she's great in it. So I not to be dismissive, but I think it's more of like, I get so much out of his other two movies, Synecdoche and the next one, that this one feels more slight.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't feel that kind of overwhelming emotion. I even think the dream sequence in this is, like, I don't feel like it's amazing. And I don't know if it's just because they're puppets. I don't know if like that automatically reduces this movie because you can't be as playful with the background, or I don't know. He just kind of, it just feels like not something that he put 100%, like all of his talent into. It's more just like an experiment, like something that he wanted to try and do something a little bit more simplified. It's almost like his What Happened Was, in a way, where it's just like two people in a room, as opposed to like trying to do the entire world and a whole life in a big theater with tons and tons of characters, like a big ensemble piece, like his last movie. It's almost like, what if I can do something with limitations and something less ambitious?
Maybe he just needed to do something a little simpler after that.
Yeah, and he had trouble getting other things made, so maybe that's why this one, I don't know. And it's not, and again, I'm not dismissing it as like not good. I do think it's actually very, very good. But his next one, again, first time I saw it, I remember I watched it I'm Thinking of Ending Things is our last film that we're talking about. I saw this, and again, I was very unhappy with the ending. It was very similar to Adaptation, where I was kind of like, so you're basically saying Jessie Buckley doesn't exist? I'm not happy about that. Like, she's just existing in this guy's head, and she's gone after, for the last 15, 20 minutes or so once she meets the janitor. And my initial response is like dissatisfaction with that choice. And then oddly enough, I walked across the street and Jessie Buckley was there filming Fargo season 4 in my neighborhood. I've told people about that and how exciting it was to basically have just watched her give this incredible performance in this movie. And then there she is filming during COVID. This is when we were doing the lockdown thing, I think, or it was at least later in the year. But anyway, I have since come around and think that I'm Thinking of Ending Things is an amazing film.
I'm visiting Jake's parents for the first time. He hasn't been my boyfriend for very long.
They really are looking forward to meeting you.
I think of ending things.
Hello? We're here.
Oh, hi.
Oh, it's all wet.
Here they come.
Oh, Jake has told us so much about you. He's told me so much about both of you, too. And you came anyway?
Jake tells me you're studying quantum psychics.
Physics.
Really? But there's just something profoundly wrong here.
Are you okay?
Yeah. I think of endings.
I am so glad Jake has found someone.
Like it does have very funny things in it, but I also, as I'm getting older and, certainly seeing my mom aging, this one's going to be hard to go back to in the same way I do with Synecdoche, which is funny to say. I watch Synecdoche at least once a year, whereas this one, it's so hard. It's really difficult for me to watch this movie because it's basically watching somebody slowly die, and their mind is almost like in a perpetual state of dementia, going back from fantasy to reality, and it's very uncomfortable knowing that this janitor character is essentially giving up on life and saying, I'm never going to find love. What's the point? I'm just going to go freeze and die in my truck. That's kind of what the ending of this movie is. And for a long time, I actually thought the ending of the movie, we hear a car starting or a car engine starting or something. And maybe that's what I was thinking, like, oh, maybe he's going to go get some help. But no, he's dead. I'm convinced that he's completely 100% dead at the end of that movie. And what we're hearing in the background during the closing credits is just a snow plow plowing the school parking lot. That's what we're hearing. I do love this movie now very much, but it's so difficult to watch despite seeing two of our best actors working today together in a car. It's so talky. Like, people talked about how insanely talky this movie was, but I love everything. I love their interactions. I love their dialogue. And there's a lot to say about each component of this film, particularly once they get to the house. And again, there's a lot of hidden things and Easter eggs and surprises to be found and connections and everything. But good Lord, I'm Thinking of Ending Things. We watched this together. Remember?
That's right.
And what were your initial thoughts and how do you feel about it today?
Yeah, I mean, I feel kind of slow because I didn't get the first time. Well, there's kind of a play on words with the I'm Thinking of Ending Things. And I was thinking of it more in terms of a relationship. And I guess you could read it. I feel like it's about both of those things, even if the relationship, only existed in his mind. It's about, kind of like ending a relationship and ending a life. And, of course, now I get that more that I know what happens. I don't know what I thought the scenes with the old man were when I I thought it was honestly someone reflecting back on his life, maybe, which I guess it kind of is. So, and then I read all of that stuff, like in the end, the play where someone comes out, and I just read it all as it slaying the relationship, and that was over. I didn't get the death thing the first time at all. Until you explained it to me.
Aww.
And now when I watched it.
But you also read the book,
too. At the very end, I think I did.
This is the first movie, by the way, that's based on a book. That it's not like Charlie Kaufman original screenplay.
But yeah, and again, it's things, when you watch it again, it's this weirder, just like Synecdoche, New York, it's kind of subtle.
Correction, sorry. I just got to correct myself. The Orchid Thief. Orchid Thief was an adaptation. What am I talking about?
Oh, right. Yeah.
I mean, that to me just feels original.
It's an adaptation of an adaptation.
Yeah. But this is this is him adapting a book. More straightforward adaptation.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Hard to, I think it's because, like, if you rewatch this knowing what it is kind of hard to watch at times. Because he's basically wrestling with himself and hating himself and sort of like angry that he never actually had a fulfilling life with a partner. And he's sort of inventing another idealized version of a partner that he would love.
I feel like that kind of comes up in every one of his movies, doesn't it?
Yeah. I hope he's happily married. I would think so.
There's he seems like such a nice guy for all these lonely, self-loathing characters.
He does.
I feel like that one line, I can't remember if I said this earlier, Adele says in Synecdoche, New York, like everyone's disappointing once you get to know them. Romantic love is just a production. Like that's an idea he uses a lot. But I think this one, and I think this is another thing I said to you, is I find this to be probably his most depressing movie.
I do now.
And I think it's even more depressing than Synecdoche just for that reason you mentioned, that I feel like his character never had a life at all.
No.
He wasn't like Joel, who had maybe a failed relationship with Clementine. He wasn't like Caden Catard, who his life, he made choices. He did things even if he made big mistakes. He had nothing. And I feel like this whole thing is just sad because it's like such an elaborately constructed fantasy that's just bright. It could tip over at any moment. And I feel like you see that a lot, actually. Especially in the dinner conversation with the parents, where he's like, and that's the thing anyway, you try so hard to, please your parents.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But then when he's telling the story of how they met and they kind of question it a little bit, and there's that part where Jessie Buckley says, well, I thought he was showing off. I didn't like that, or I forget, something like that. And the mother just looks like so sad. She's like, you didn't like him anymore. And there's this real awkward pause. Like, it's like where she's trying to think of what to say.
The dinner where nobody eats anything, if you notice.
And it's like, I feel like that's one of many moments where it's like, no, they had to work out.
Yeah, you want this to be real. You want them to actually, but I think the janitor is just full of self-loathing.
Yeah.
Or
fear.
Yeah, probably both. Fear and self-loathing.
Yeah.
But, and there's just little hints, like there's the shy, awkward student that walks in the hallway that actually kind of gives him like a little bit of a smile of like, oh yeah, I understand what it's like to be different, or disconnected. And she shows up at the Tulsi Town as being the one person that is trying to reach out in a way, and say you don't have to kill yourself. Basically, that's what she's trying to say. While the other two girls are the ones that were mocking him in the high school. They're the other two Tulsi girls, and they're just standing there laughing and, just not acknowledging him at all. And just, both of them together, even just sitting in a car, her reciting poems, her turning into Pauline Kael, Jenna Rollins from A Woman Under the Influence at one point. It's just like, how can you not be amazed by what Jessie Buckley does in this movie? Like, because she's has no clear identity, her name changes, her profession changes, she has to like almost adapt to the fantasy in his head, and does it so brilliantly. And Jesse Plemons, man, well, talk about a guy. And it's funny, people like actually thought, Jesse Plemons reminds me of Philip Seymour Hoffman a little bit. People said that, and I was like, huh, interesting.
I could see that.
I could see a connection there, but again, another sad, lonely protagonist here that we're kind of expected to sympathize with. And I guess now I do, in a way, where it's just, oh, poor, sad, lonely old man who just basically didn't have a fulfilling life, and he's given up. He's basically decided there's no reason to keep going, and decides to end it. And I mean, part of me wonders if he has dementia that's causing him to have these delusions.
Oh, that's definitely something that happened,
because it happened to his parents.
Happens to his parents,
yeah, especially his dad.
Yeah, which are like projections also, right?
Mm-hmm. Or they could have really happened. Or just like they're his memory again of what happened when they both were aging. And if you look closely, and it requires pausing, everybody. But if you look at all the things that he's got piled up in his room, you'll see a copy of certain books. You'll see a DVD for A Beautiful Mind, which is quoted at the very end of the movie. It's like a reenactment, and Oklahoma is reenacted obviously towards the end as well. And there's even like journals that say disappointments.
I was going to say the thing I liked, I paused it too, is he had a few video, like VHS, that were labeled Future Efforts at Success, Unforgettable Mishaps, Lasting Memories of Sorrow, and Abandoned Friendship.
So we're inside his head, literally.
I mean, and you can see those I thought were the saddest, obviously. But I mean, well, other things are too, but you can basically see in that room, like, all the things he kind of used to construct this or a lot of the things, he used to construct this fake life,
And the basement has all the paintings.
Yeah. And I like how, so I feel like he's kind of constructing this house as they're, walking through it.
Yes.
And adding things, even like the dog. He's like, oh, do you like dogs? There's a dog.
Yep. I love that.
Oh, it's smelly. And then it disappears. And I like how
it takes forever for the parents to show up.
Yeah.
Like he's hesitant to relive that experience.
Or I feel like he's almost deciding, I feel like everything's a projection. He's deciding what they're going to be like or what form they're going to take or whatever. And the basement, I love how he says the basement is unfinished. Because it seems almost like a play on words. Like I don't know if that's what it was, but yeah, he wasn't finished like forming what would be down there yet. But he definitely didn't want her to go down there.
And realize that he's a janitor because his uniform's in the washer.
Were there, in the wash. So
little things hidden throughout this movie.
And it's so weird. Like, again, there's so many details you can connect. Like, I noticed when they first got into the house, he had that water bottle they put in a drawer. And there's in the very first scene, well, you can also see it throughout. You can see that in the janitor's house. And he also has dog toys on the floor.
Oh.
Which I only noticed after watching
I didn't notice
it
that.
a few times.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Well,
So,
this the wallpaper.
there's a lot
the
of
wallpaper
detail.
in his house. I mean, that's his house, right? Like the.
I assumed so, yeah. And the swing set, and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it's like Synecdoche, New York. Once you know what's coming, you can connect more details of the janitor's house and life and everything. And what he's saying on the phone to her is what he's saying at the window about fear and assumptions. And yeah. So.
Yeah, and also really great performances from the parents. I mean, we sort of come to expect Toni Collette being incredible in just about everything. David Thewlis, especially here too, when he's basically, completely deteriorating his mind. And just in that room with her, it's really heartbreaking. And of course, seeing her on her deathbed. I mean, all that stuff is like, this is such a hard movie in a way that, like, why does Synecdoche work as more of an entertainment that's kind of like darkly humorous? Most of this is kind of bleak, like right down to the ending, so I mean, I get why people wouldn't necessarily appreciate this movie and sort of like go, oh, that's too much for me, or there's too much talking. That's just them in the car. Like, people were very dismissive too, which is kind of sad, because I feel like the more people are dismissive of his work, the less chance we're going to get for more Charlie Kaufman work. So I hope people will embrace whatever comes next from him. Yeah. And I also love them getting it, because we've gotten into these arguments too about lyrics, like "Baby, It's Cold Outside" when they're analyzing art. It's kind of funny, because it made me think of when we disagreed and had different interpretations of "Power of the Dog." Like, couples really go through, like, have these moments where they have completely different perspectives on something, and I think that's very real. Like, some of the things they're talking about.
Yeah, no, they, yeah. A lot of their arguments, they were very, like, this modeled well after, what two young academic
yeah,
who are slightly competitive sometimes, what their talk would be like. I thought it was really well done.
Oh, yeah.
I do one other thing I want to point out is I thought it was kind of funny, though. The very last time I was watching it, I noticed something every time, but they were when they were doing the tour of the farm, and he was telling the story of the pigs. Right before that, he was saying how the lambs were frozen and not to worry about them. The little subtitle, I wouldn't know this except for the subtitle said "lambs bleeding."
Oh no!
They bleeded it a few times. Like, I wouldn't have known the difference between the sheep and the lambs.
But the pig is bleeding out too. In a way, right towards the end. Or is that he's just infested with maggots? Right,
he's infested. They tell that story. He was infested with maggots. And I also love how she brings out the big ham and she says everything's farm to table. She puts a gigantic ham in front of her after you've told that story. It's like, where did that ham?
Uncomfortable.
Where did that ham come from? So yeah.
Oh God, though, but that funny. You know what? That is hinting at the end of the movie when you're talking about don't worry about the frozen lamb. That makes it even sadder.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, it definitely said in the subtitle, lambs bleeding, and they were frozen. He said they were dead and frozen, so.
That's what he ends up being. Yeah. What a happy note to end on.
I realized it tied in then. Perfect.
Wow. Charlie Kaufman, you're a genius. Genius, right? Or is it genus? Genus, right. Oh, that's so good. He's so good. I love Charlie Kaufman. He also has a book that eventually I'll read called Antkind. That's about a failed film critic trying to piece together a long lost film that's 3 months long. So eventually I'll read that. It's very intimidating. I mean, if I've gotten through Thomas Pynchon, I'm sure I can eventually pick this up. I'm excited to read it. And then in February, coming up in about a month, there's an animated movie coming up on Netflix that he just wrote. So we'll see what that is like. It is called Orion and the Dark, which is basically about a young boy who is terrified of everything. So it seems like right in his wheelhouse because it's about anxiety. And it's strange, too, because the next Pixar sequel is Inside Out 2, and the new emotion is anxiety. So maybe this will be the year of the anxiety animation spectacular. We'll see if both films are good. I'm excited to see like a Charlie Kaufman scripted animated film. It'll premiere on Netflix on February 2nd. We'll watch it together. Yay! Just because we're such huge fans. Synecdoche, New York, one of the greatest films I'll ever see in my life. And I'm so glad I finally got to talk about it because I love Charlie Kaufman and so do you. Yay!
Yay!
Where can people find you, Sharon, on the interwebs? Is it mostly mentalfilmness.com?
Yeah, I think I mentioned all of them earlier. But if you just look under anything, it's FILMNESS, Mental Filmness. There's a .com. There's a Facebook whatever. Mental Film. What is the Facebook one? It's just you put that on any. Twitter. What else? Twitter and Film Freeway. Those are the main ones. But filmfreeway.mentalfilmness. That. It's the same everywhere. There's no numbers or symbols or
Hopefully not.
to make it tricky.
Yeah, you don't have to overthink this one, folks. Unlike Charlie Kaufman's movies, which I love overthinking them, and I love talking about them with you, especially. Even if we're not doing a podcast or in front of microphones, it's just great to talk with you about what makes him so special. And, you know, he's thought-provoking, funny, sad, like all the things that I feel like we experience together in life, in love, and through art. And you're a great artist in of yourself. I mean, truly,
thanks.
You know, you've had a lot of accomplishments that you should be proud of. And I'm certainly proud of the fact that the first episode of 2024 is on my favorite writer with my favorite person.
Oh,
it's such a joy to have you.
Thank you. It's fun.
It was. I'm so glad we did it. Everybody visit directorsclubpodcast.com. Send me an email, directorsclubpodcast@gmail.com. And stay tuned, because in just about a week, you are going to get to hear my favorite films of 2023 alongside guests Patrick Ripoll and Bill Ackerman, two of my other favorite people to talk with about cinema. I can't wait to hear what they think of the year of film. And this was just a great way to kick off the new year. And there will be a lot more to come in the future, so I hope you all stick around. I am no longer on Substack, because they apparently love Nazis, and we don't need them in our lives. So bye-bye, Substack. Hello, Beehive. So visit me at 5years.beehive.com. Beehive is spelled Beehiiv. I know it's a weird spelling, and it will be in the show notes, so don't worry. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening, and thank you again to my amazing partner, Sharon, for being on the show.
Thank you.
You have struggled into listening to this podcast, and now you're silently falling out of it. This is everyone's experience. Every single one who downloaded it. The specifics hardly matter. Everyone is everyone. So you are Jim, Sharon, Patrick, Bill, Ellen. You are Charlie. All his meager sadnesses are yours. As you recognize your transience, as you begin to lose your characteristics and memory, one by one, you learn there was no one watching you, and there never was. You think about listening to something else, not coming from any place particular, perhaps from YouTube or Spotify. You're just listening to another voice somewhere else. Now you are here. It's 7:43. Now you are here. It's 7:44.